President Donald Trump shared some interesting poll results with his Twitter followers, tweeting, "Great news, #MAGA," and accompanying his message was a graphic showing his approval rating to be 55%. That graphic came from Lou Dobbs, who reported on his show on Fox Business.
The Mexican city of Oaxaca tonight.
Sorry, wrong clip. He had reported,
according to a Georgetown University poll, the president's overall approval is now 55%. Let's hear that, 55%. And the approval rating for the president's handling of the economy, a robust 58%.
In fact, Lou Dobbs was mistaken, prompting the director of Georgetown University Politics, which produced that study, to point out the mistake. As his tweet correctly pointed out, the poll found that Trump's job approval is 43%, his disapproval 52%, and that 55% number may have been mistakenly drawn from the president's unfavorable rating, which was 55%, while his favorable rate was 40%. Well, at the time of this recording, Trump is still yet to pull down that tweet, which has so far received 130,000 likes and 32,000 retweets. Credit where credit is due. Lou Dobbs made a correction, one albeit couched in all kinds of other distractions.
We have new poll numbers tonight on a growing issue, at least amongst the radical Dems, that we'd like to share with you tonight. But before we get to those numbers, I'd like to repair something I got wrong last night, incorrectly reporting that a Georgetown poll showed the president had an overall approval rating of 55%. The number, in fact, is 43%. That same poll found that President Trump has a 58% approval rating for the handling of the economy.
The fact that Trump has yet to do the same is obviously wrong. He's misinforming his following. But more interestingly is the fact that it's likely imprudent. The people who get their information from Trump's Twitter feed are diehard MAGA caterpillars. If Trump's approval rating was really 55%, he would pretty much be a shoo-in for re-election. If his supporters believe his tweet and continue to believe that he is that well regarded on election day, that could hurt Trump in the only poll that really matters. If you're certain your candidate is going to win, you might be less likely to turn out to vote. While an American president pushing misinformation is certainly problematic, if routine, there's another layer of stupidity overlaying this entire incident, and that is the tendency of partisans of all stripes to cherry-pick single polls that support their viewpoints and ignore the larger patterns. If only one poll exists on an issue, it's certainly reasonable to cite those poll results. Indeed, digging into the nitty-gritty of one poll's results can provide detailed insight. But the reality is that a single study in science is virtually meaningless, and a single poll in politics is equally misleading. If you want solid, reliable information about a big question, in other words,
you separate the signal from the noise. Watch the signal.
In this video, I'll break down Donald Trump's job approval numbers and his favorables. I'll break down how approval on key issues ought to affect campaign strategy, and drawing from lessons learned in the 2016 presidential election, I'll provide some context for how favorability numbers might actually help us to predict the 2020 election. In fact, I'll give you a single number value that should provide an answer to this question. What does he need to win? While pollsters go through great pains to try to make their polls as accurate as possible, numerous factors can muddle their studies. Good pollsters will correct for it in their data, but single studies may oversample particular demographic groups. Even massive studies survey a tiny proportion of the total electorate, and signals as subtle as a surveyor's tone of voice can accidentally bias responses. On top of that, respondents may, for other reasons, misinform the study, whether out of malice or embarrassment or outside pressures. Political polls always rely on self-reporting, and the reality is that people don't always do what they say they will do, nor do they always feel how they say they do. For these reasons and more, polls have serious limitations baked in. Some, but not all, of these limitations can be overcome by looking at poll aggregations. Overarching ideas involving standardized polling practices and the culture of the electorate will remain. But aggregations of many polls can overcome, for instance, the drawbacks inherent in small sample sizes and the biases of individual organizations. There are several poll aggregators that you can look at for aggregations, including 538.com and Huffington Post. But for the purposes of this video, for the sake of consistency across all figures, I'm only going to rely on the aggregations produced by Real Clear Politics, which I consider to be reasonably reliable. That one poll that I mentioned in the intro of this video found Trump's job approval to be 43% and his disapproval to be 52%. Those numbers are actually pretty much spot on when compared to the overall poll averages presented by RCP. Currently, RCP finds Trump's average approval level to be 43.2% and his disapproval to be 52.8% for a net job approval of negative 9.6%. Since the spring of 2018, Trump's job approval has remained around 43%, disapproval around 53%. Closely related but distinct from approval is favorability, and in this area, Trump has remained relatively consistent throughout his presidency. Since the beginning of his presidency, Trump has remained between 37 and 45% favorable, between 47 and 57% unfavorable. Currently, he's at 41.2% favorable and 53.1% unfavorable for a net favorability rating of 11.9% in the negative direction. Since throughout his presidency, Trump has been dogged with an overall negative public image, one could argue that his re-election chances are quite poor. I mean, how do you win re-election when most voters don't like you? In response to this position, Trump's advocates would rightly argue that Trump won election in the first place with low popularity ratings. And indeed, while his job approval ratings did not exist before he took office, Trump's favorability was more of a net negative before he assumed office than it is now. In fact, on Election Day 2016, his net favorability was 21.0% unfavorable, nearly double the net negative he enjoys today. Still, Trump wasn't the only historically unpopular candidate in 2016. Hillary Clinton was also incredibly detested with a net unfavorability of 12.6% when RCP stopped tracking the day before the election. Clinton may have won the popular vote, but it's the Electoral College that matters, and Trump got a narrow victory in 2016. Indeed, it was a very narrow victory. In an election where more than 120 million votes were cast, a Washington Post analysis reveals that the election was effectively decided by just 107,000 votes. Had Clinton won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the three states where she lost by the narrowest margins, she would have won the Electoral College. She lost these states by roughly 68,000, 12,000, and 27,000 votes respectively. Altogether representing just 0.09% of all votes cast, Clinton lost by a margin of error. Even a statistically insignificant shift in overall support would have changed everything. Because the election was so close, it gives us a strong sense of where the threshold lies between a Trump victory or Trump defeat in 2020. Thanks to the Electoral College system, Trump was able to win the election despite trailing in the overall popular vote. For this reason, he was able to pass the win threshold while maintaining a favorability deficit to his competitor. Trump's net favorability on election day was negative 21.0%. Clinton's was negative 12.6%. That means his net favorability was below hers by precisely 8.4 points. Moving ahead to 2020, the very problems in polls that existed back in 2016 will continue to exist. And so too, it seems, will be the threshold Trump will need to pass in order to win the Electoral College. Since Trump was able to narrowly overcome a favorability deficit of 8.4 points, that same deficit, I expect, will be what he will be able to make up for again in 2020. If Trump maintains his current net unfavorable rating of 11.9%, for example, I would expect him to be able to beat anyone whose net approval falls below 3.5% unfavorable. A Democrat with favorability above negative 3.5%, however, would be a dangerous opponent. While Trump has proven that he can overcome a favorability deficit, there are limitations, and that 8.4 point figure seems to be the approximate line. Don't take this as gospel, it's just one metric, but I do think that the 8.4 point threshold is a useful figure for estimating what kind of popularity deficit Trump is able to endure. To the extent that the 8.4% threshold is useful, it is not good news for Trump's current re-election chances. Again, according to RCP data, virtually every potential opponent Trump may face in the 2020 election seems to currently poll at a net average over negative 3.5%. This includes Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, even Pete Buttigieg. They all passed that threshold. Of course, while Trump's favorability has been relatively stable throughout his presidency, it is clearly subject to change, as will be the favorability ratings of his opponents. One of the major factors that will affect how the president is viewed, of course, is his performance as president. While I may have railed a bit against giving too much weight to a single poll in the intro of this video, one thing that is useful about individual polls is the detailed indications they can give you about particular factors behind the headline numbers. Take, for instance, the study Lou Dobbs cited. While Dobbs misrepresented Trump's actual job approval, it's 43%, not 55%, he accurately represents another figure, Trump's job approval on the economy. No, sorry.
According to a Georgetown University poll, the president's overall approval is now
43%.
Let's hear that.
43%.
And the approval rating for the president's handling of the economy, a robust 58%.
43%
is pretty robust too, don't you think?
Trump's handling of the economy, according to that Georgetown poll, is rated quite positively. To be precise, his net favorability on that issue is plus 20%. That study also found that he had an even more positive net approval rating when it comes to jobs, where he has a net approval of plus 23%. On other issues, his job approval is not so high. His score on foreign affairs is negative 13%. His net approval on taxes is negative 2%. On immigration, it's negative 15%. And worse among all his scores is his rating on healthcare. His approval on this issue is 25 points lower than his disapproval. Trump's overall net favorability relative to the potential opponents can give us a sense of who will win the election. But these more granular looks at his approval by topic can give us insight as to how Trump and his competitors should campaign. If the trends found in the Georgetown study carry over to other polls, a successful 2020 campaign for Trump would be all about the economy and jobs. His opponent would have a good chance to beat him if they focus more on foreign affairs, immigration, and especially healthcare. Yet another campaign tactic Trump could take up would be to diffuse the Democrats' most powerful issue. Trump, in fact, may have been on the right track when he tweeted in late March that the GOP would become known as the party of healthcare. Were he able to advance and pass a healthcare plan with even similar popularity levels to the Democratic proposals, like Medicare for All, his job approval on the issue would surely shift dramatically. And by the way, yes, Medicare for All is quite popular. A Reuters Ipsos poll found that 70% of Americans supported the policy, with just 21% opposing it. Even Medicare for All opponents have trouble cherry-picking polls that support their claim that it is unpopular. In an article in The Hill titled, "Poll Just 13% Want Medicare for All If It Means End of Private Insurance," The Hill's evidence for their claim demonstrates that their headline is absurdly misleading. They cite their own poll, a Hill-Harris-X survey, which found that, given multiple options, just 13% of respondents chose universal coverage without private insurance above all other options, which included universal coverage with a private supplement and universal coverage with a private opt-out. That doesn't mean that only 13% of voters would support Medicare for All if it means ending private insurance. It just means it's only the top option among many for only 13%. That same study found that 71% of Americans wanted the government to provide universal coverage. The obvious conclusion is that Americans want some kind of universal government coverage like Medicare for All and are split on the precise details. If I didn't know any better, I'd think that The Hill is intentionally lying to their readers. But I digress. The popularity of a system like Medicare for All does make it challenging for the president to find a healthcare option that would be even more popular. Yet another challenge he faces in diffusing the Democrats' strongest campaign issue is the fact that Mitch McConnell has been clear that he wants to avoid that issue. In truth, I find it difficult to determine which is the path of least resistance for Trump to secure re-election. So I'll throw the question to you guys. Would it be easier for him to avoid the topic and control the 2020 narrative, keeping it focused on jobs and the economy? Or does he need to fight for a popular healthcare proposal in order to diffuse the strongest Democratic talking point? What do you think? What does he need to win?
The president's overall approval is now percent. Let's hear that. Percent. And the approval rating for the president's handling of the economy, a robust 58%. Percent is pretty robust too, don't you think?